This is Jessica Taylor and Asia Alsgaard interviewing Hugh Dischinger on June 17th, 2013 at 3:30 p.m. Mr. Dischinger, can you please state your full name?
Hugh Charles Dischinger, Sr.
Senior. What is your date of birth?
March 4th, 1924.
Okay, and where were you born?
Chicago, Illinois.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
What were your parents' names and occupations?
My father's name was Irvin Ernest Dischinger. My mother's name was Evelyn Martha Bender Dischinger. My dad brought the family here to Gloucester from Chicago in 1927 because he was engaged by the East Coast Utilities Company to expand the telephone and electric power system in the area.
Okay. What about your mother?
My mother was a stenographer and a court note keeper for the local judges, local courts.
In Chicago or here?
No, here.
Here. Okay. When did they move from Chicago to Gloucester?
In October of 1927.
So right after you were born?
Yeah, I was 3 years old.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have any siblings?
Yes, I had 3 brothers and no sisters.
So it was a family of boys?
Yeah.
What did your brothers end up doing?
We're all engineers except the only 2 of us left. The 2 middle ones are left. My oldest brother was an electrical engineer. My next oldest brother was a civil engineer. He's still living. He's in a retirement home in Richmond. He's 2 years older than I am. I'm a civil engineer, licensed both as a professional engineer and as a land surveyor. My youngest brother went to Hampton-Sydney, and he was involved with engineering, but he was not an engineer himself. He worked for a lot of engineering companies. My oldest brother never graduated from college, but he went with a construction company, and he worked all over the country, literally. He was probably the smartest one of the 4 of us, and whenever he moved to a new location, he would find a night school, college night school, and attend classes there. And so he had all the credits, but he never put them together to get a baccalaureate degree. My next brother, Jim, and I both went to VMI. And Jim and both of us graduated from VMI in civil engineering. Jim worked in civil engineering with Stone Webster Engineering Corporation for a long time before he retired. I had a break in the middle of my education there due to World War II. I was in my 2nd year at VMI, and they put all of us that were attending VMI in reserve. And I had an option. I was in the Field Artillery ROTC there. When the Army Air Corps came around and offered us an opportunity to get into the Army Air Corps Reserve, and I said, well, I think I'd rather fly than walk around in this mud, so I joined the Army Air Corps Reserve, and I was among the very first to be called up from VMI to go in the Army Air Corps. And so I spent 4 years out flying airplanes. Then I went back to VMI after the war and finished.
Did you actually serve in Europe or the Asian theater?
Asian theater.
Actually.
I was a fighter pilot. I flew fighters. You know, the power and telephone service. And we actually lived in the Batatat Hotel because we came from Chicago, and he had arranged for us to have a house in West Point. And you could come from Chicago all the way by train down to West Point. And so we did. The rest of the family came down here. We had been down there. And Dad had a house for us there in West Point. And the pulp mill was in full blast. And you know what I'm talking about? Pulp mill used to have the most terrible smell from the smoke. So we moved into the house that Dad had gotten for us there, and we stayed there about 2 or 3 days, and Mom says, I'm not staying here. So we pulled up stakes and we came to Gloucester. Well, Dad had not found a house for us in Gloucester, so we lived in the Batatat Hotel. And his office was right straight across the street from that, in that brick building that is still there. I don't know what it's used for now, but that was his office. And so that's how we got to Gloucester, and we lived at several different places around Gloucester.
When you lived in the Batatat Hotel, what did it look like?
Well, it's very similar to what it is now. It had a porch that was very... people like to come up to court days in those days. They had court days once a month. And they had a bunch of rockers on that front porch. People used to love to get up there and sit down on the rock. Court day was a big day in those days, back in the 20s and the 30s. All the people from Guinea would come up and sell fish and oysters and that kind of stuff. And there was a lot of buying and selling, and people just enjoyed getting together. You didn't have television, nobody listened to the radio in those days and that kind of stuff, you know. And so it was a gathering place, and people would all come on court day. When we first got here, they didn't have a wall around the court ring, and later on they put a wooden fence around it, and then that was replaced with the present brick wall was built by the WPA, I think by 1933 or somewhere along in there.
Mm-hmm. From court days, do you have any specific particular moments that you remember?
Yes. One of the places that we lived was in the building that's still there. Now, if you're familiar with the court green, you know where the law office is, the Hardert Martin Law Office, and the next building up the street from there is a brick building, a 2-story brick building with columns in the front of it. We lived in the apartment on the 2nd floor of that. And one day, court day was very popular, as I said. Everybody came from all around the county. The sheriff we had then was a fellow named Eugene Rhodes. I don't know if you run into that name. And the story was, I don't know whether it's true or not, that was that he had been a Texas Ranger. And he had a 6-shooter, and he wore the 6-shooter. And I was a kid at the time, and in that building we lived in, you could overlook what was going on outside. And I used to get up into that window and just watch what was going on out there. And one day, there was a prisoner. That was when the court was all in the court building inside of the court green there. And court was going on, and they had some guy in there that decided he wanted to make a break for it. And so he did. He ran out of the door, and he came in my direction toward the way I was sitting up there in the window, and the sheriff was right behind him. and the sheriff tackled him right in the middle of where the street is now. As it comes around and gets ready to turn back down, come down this way. He tackled him down and took him back into the courtroom, and I saw that happen. So, but you know, we had a lot of fun. The jail was in the old jail in the court green there, and that was interesting to us because, as kids, because we went to Body School, and we would walk by there every day, and the prisoners in there would sometimes holler at us and ask us to go buy cigarettes for them. And there was a general store. It's no longer there, but at the far end of the Body Hotel, there was a store there, and they sold cigarettes. So these prisoners would throw a dime out through the bars, and we'd take the dime and go over to the store and buy a pack of cigarettes to come back, and they'd put a string out through the bars, and we'd tie the cigarettes on, and they'd pull the cigarettes out. So we did that, I don't know how many times, but that was a routine for us on our way to school. So I went to Body School, and elementary school, the old elementary school, and I was in the 6th grade when they built the water tank. That's when we first got a water system in the courthouse here. And I was in the 6th grade, and that was up on the 2nd floor of that building and facing out onto Main Street, and across Main Street was where they were building the tank. And I was fascinated with that because that was in the days when they still used hot rivets to put the tank together. There was a guy on the ground who would heat those rivets up till they were red hot, and he would throw them up. The guy would catch them in a cup and put them in the hole and knock them home with a riveting machine. And so I watched that, and that may be what got me interested in going into civil engineering. I don't know.
Wow. What is your earliest memory of Main Street?
Well, not at the very earliest. There were as many horse and buggies as there were cars, but you know, that gradually changed. But as far as the court green itself, there's been very little change in it. The location or the buildings there are pretty much the same as they were when I grew up. Of course, this end of Main Street, this house here was built, for instance, in 1928, and it was like maybe the 3rd or 4th house that was built on the street at that time. And so it was there were not as many houses in the courthouse area as there are now, not by a long shot, but there are not a whole lot more now.
Mm. When did you notice that court days started dying out?
Well, I guess I kind of lost track because in the 30s, they were still having court day, but it was beginning to, I would say probably in the late 20s it began to dwindle out. And then I left the local school system in my junior year and followed my brother Jim to Christ Church School, and so I was out of the community from that point. But I guess it was probably the late 20s when things really began to change.
Why do you think that was?
Well, we in 27 when we came here, we were in the middle of the Depression, and By 29, it was beginning to get a little bit better, and then in the early 30s, a little bit better. Not a whole lot better, but a little bit better. And so I guess that was that was what it began to change things. And as I say, more automobiles began to show up and things like that. So we didn't put those things together in those days, but that's what was happening.
Who did you notice that first got the automobile? Who was first in getting a car?
Probably Marshall Lewis, who was the president of the bank.
Yeah.
You know him?
I just, when you said it was a president of a bank, I thought.
Yeah. Well, we had, and you know, and the lawyers used to call it Lawyers Row on that side of the courtroom. All of those were law offices in those days, and they used to call that Lawyers Row. And as I said, my mother worked for one of them who was a lawyer. Well, you know Casper Jones? Well, it was Casper Jones's grandfather that my mother worked for. And he was a lawyer and later became a lower court judge. And my mother was his secretary.
Wow. So you said that the lawyers and the judges were the first to get cars?
Yeah. Dr. Tabb, Harry Tabb, his house was on the corner of Duval and Main Street up here. The financial outfit, Wells Fargo, was in that house. That's the house that he lived in. And his office was behind that. The small building behind that was his office. He had to have a car because that was in the days when the doctors came to you. You didn't go to the doctors. And I know that because we were living in a house at Gloucester Point at the time. I was 8 years old, and I developed double pneumonia. And Dr. Tabb used to visit me every single day, and sometimes more than once a day, because I was very sick. It was in February of 1932, and it was cold down in that place. They had wood stoves to heat the house, and they had a wood stove in my room. I isolated me in one room. They had a wood stove, and they heated that thing up till it was cherry red. Kept feeding wood into it and piled the covers up on me, and my temperature went up. The highest it got was 106, and Dr. Tabb was very concerned about that, but it broke, and that was the end of the pneumonia. As soon as that fever broke, I was over it, and I got well. But Dr. Tabb traveled around the county and visited patients 24 hours a day.
Mm-hmm. So what other people were likely to get a car because they needed one?
I really don't know.
Okay.
I really don't know. I think, of course, people that lived outside of the village and lived in farms and houses around in the countryside and worked in town, a lot of those people had to have automobiles to get into town. Mm. But as I say, as late as the late 20s, they still arrive in buggies, but most of them could get a Model T or something. You could buy a car for $500 in those days, brand new car.
Mm-hmm. Did most people buy brand new cars?
Yeah, there was a dealership, Bob Farrell. Have you heard that name? Well, Bob Farrell owned a garage and sales place at the corner of Duval Avenue, on the other corner up the street from there. The one that's still there, that has the overhang over the sidewalk. That building, that was his place, and he sold Hudson's and what was the thing? Terraplanes, Hudsons and Terraplanes. And you don't never heard of those before, but they were made by the same company. There was a Ford dealership. And let me see, that fellow named Johnny Hunt ran the Ford dealership. So, you know, there were several of them. Wallace Robinson, who lived in the house directly across from Botetourt School, had a Buick and Buick and Chevrolet dealership right down here where it is now. No, it's not here anymore. It's up here where the food place is.
This was all in the 20s and 30s?
Yeah.
Okay. When did your family get a car?
My mother bought, my father and my mother separated. Dad had to go where the work was, and there wasn't any work in the kind of engineering that he was doing. He was a construction engineer. And so he left and went back to Chicago. And later on, it was years later, before they finally divorced, but my mother decided she was going to keep the family here. And in 1935, I think it was, 1935, she decided that she wanted to make a trip back to Illinois, where she was from, to visit relatives and friends there. And so she bought a 1933 Chevrolet. It was a used car, and we all packed in, piled into that thing and drove from here to Chicago in it. So that was the first car that we had.
Wow. And you held on to it for a while?
Yeah, couldn't do much else with it, but I don't remember what she got when she got rid of that one, but people kept the cars for quite a while.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Do you remember your earliest memory of the gas station? The Texaco on the corner of Main and 14?
Yeah, well, of course, my wife came from that family, you know. My wife was a Brown. She was her maiden name was Thelma Ann Brown, and Jack Brown, who owned the was her uncle. In fact, come on in the other room. I'll show you a picture of her father, who was Tab. There were two doctors in the county, Harry Tabb and Dr. Clemens, down at Hayes Store.
Right.
And they were the two main doctors. There weren't, I don't think there were any other doctors practicing in the county until my brother-in-law, Raymond Brown, came along. And then he and his brother Bill practiced here. I don't remember any other doctors.
Mm-hmm. So the Brown family owned the gas station, but you knew it as the gas station before you met your wife, right?
I didn't meet, my wife was 4 years younger than I. Mm-hmm. And people used to ask me if I dated Ann when I was at Christ Church School. I said, no, we didn't date 14-year-old girls in those days. They do now, but we didn't then. I didn't know her. I knew her brothers, but I didn't know her. Uh-huh. And I didn't actually meet her until after the war, after World War II, and I came back. Mm-hmm. And her brother set that up. He had me come up to supper one night, and guess what? Ann was also invited. So.
Oh, wonderful. Mm. So did your family go to the gas station that Captain Jack owned?
Go to the doctor what?
Go to the gas station that Captain Jack owned?
I didn't understand the last part.
Did your family go to the gas station that Captain Jack owned, the Texaco station?
Yeah, I guess so. Bill Brown, as you probably know, Bill and Raymond grew up almost across the road from Uncle Jack. And you know, we were pretty closely related when Ann and I were married. The two families got pretty close together then.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember the one-armed man at the gas station? The Herman Brown, or Howard Brown?
I remember the one-armed man. He was a tailor, I'm thinking of. No, I didn't know. You're talking about Dr. Wolf, I think, aren't you?
No,
his name Wolf?
The man that worked at the gas station that Captain Jack employed. No?
Oh yeah, sure. Heck, what's his name? You remember his name?
Is it Howard Brown?
Howard Brown, yeah, Howard. Howard was a relative of my wife's, but not a close relative.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember anything specific about Captain Jack or Howard Brown or the gas station? Any memories stick out to you?
Captain Jack was kind of high and mighty. I was finally invited to dinner at his house one time, and Ann and I were going together, and that was a high compliment.
Oh.
But I don't mean by that he was a mean man at all. He just didn't have a whole lot of. I don't think he had a whole lot of real close friends. And after all, being out there in Wereneck, and he pretty well stayed in Wereneck, he would come out and visit down here at Edge Hill, and he had as he began to get all the stations around, he'd go out there and visit, but he didn't stay around long.
Where were his other stations?
He had one over at Matthews Courthouse. You know, when you go into Matthews Courthouse, and I think his station's still there. You make a right turn and go right down the main street of Matthews Courthouse. He had that station there. I think that was the first one over there.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
What physically to you looks different about Main Street and the gas station than when you first remember it?
Well, I walked it a lot. My brother and I delivered the Richmond Times-Dispatch, and we walked. We would pick up the newspapers at corner of Duval Avenue and Main Street, and one of us would go deliver the papers from there up to the Newington Church, and the other one would deliver them from there down to Edge Hill. And so we walked the streets all the time, and we never got away from that. Gloucester's always been my home.
Uh-huh. So you were out there every day?
Yeah.
Were most people out there every day?
Not that time of day. We would deliver papers at 6 o'clock in the morning.
Uh-huh.
And we didn't see many people then.
When would people start arriving?
Oh, I don't know. I think it's pretty much the same as it is now. Most people in Gloucester County don't work in Gloucester County. They work over across the York River, most of them, or somewhere else. But it was pretty much the same then, although I don't know that many of them worked across the river, but they lived on the farms surrounding the village. Mm-hmm. And so they didn't come to the village unless they had to.
How often would you see friends that you had from not immediate Main Street area but surrounding areas?
Okay, well, the Fields family. There were two brothers, Casey Field and what was the other one? One of them lived, you go out here and you go, turn up there by Body Tot School and go to the reservoir, okay? He had a farm up there just before you get where the reservoir is now, and we used to visit over there quite often. Every day in the summertime we'd walk over there because he had made himself a pool of water over there to feed his horses and cows, and we turned it into a swimming pool. We'd go over there every summer and go swimming in that pool. Then the other field, I can't think of what his first name was. I'll think of it out a while. But he was on Route 14. I don't know, about a mile and a half past. That place has a name. Holly Hill. You know Holly Hill Farm? That's where the other field lived. And we used to visit there. One of his sons was our age, and we used to go over there and visit. Well, by visit, I mean we'd spend the weekend. We'd go over there and spend the weekend with him.
Would you get there in the car?
Yeah. Stephen Field, that's just one that had Holly Hill.
Oh, okay.
He had one of the first cars, and so he would bring us. We'd go out there for a weekend, and he'd bring us back on Monday or Sunday night or Monday, something like that, and that was a real thrill. We'd get to ride in his car from out there back here to the courthouse.
Wow. So you're a teenager and you have access to your mom's car. What do you do on the weekends?
It was kind of tough, but yeah. Okay.
What did you do on Friday nights or on the weekends?
Well, about the only thing, we had a skating rink here, but the skating rink. That was very popular when I was a teenager, and all the kids went over there. But other than that, there wasn't much else to do except go to the movies. Mm-hmm. We would go to the theater and go to the movies. Mm-hmm. One night, my brother and I were at the movies down here, and Brown Farnold was the manager of that theater. And he did the whole works. He had a projectionist that would go up there and run the projector for him, but sometimes he'd get sick or something, so Brown would do it himself. And my brother Jim and I were at the movie one night, and we were sitting there, and all of a sudden the lights went out. Well, that was nothing really unusual. That happened from time to time, a lot more than it does nowadays. So we sat there, and we sat there, and we sat there, and nothing happened, and the projection room in the theater then was up on a platform at the back of the hall, and you had to climb a ladder to get up there. And all of a sudden, Brown comes out of the projection room, and he said, "A hurricane has hit Woods Crossroads," and he said, "That's why the lights are there." So we're not going to get them back. And so everybody started getting out of the theater, and Brown was waiting until everybody got out, and my brother Jim and I were standing there, and he said, "Come on," he said, "let's go up there and see what's going on up there." So we got in the car with him and went up to Woods Crossroads and knocked a building down right there at Woods Crossroads. Actually, it was a tornado. He called it a hurricane, but tornado. And the thing I remember about that was that a horse got down the well, and they were trying to get the horse out of the well when we got there. But it was a very localized damage. Right at that intersection was about the only place that really damaged was.
Mm-hmm. That's a really great story. Do you have any other ones like that about Main Street?
I got a million of them.
Well, tell me some of them.
No, but I can't think of them much anymore. See, I'm 89 years old. My memory's not as good as it used to be.
Okay, well, here's an example. Ronnie Stubblefield, do you know who that is?
Yeah, I know the name, but I can't say I know him.
Well, he told me about every single time he went cruising for chicks. Did you ever go cruising for chicks?
No, I don't know.
No?
I don't think so.
No. He also said there were watering holes.
Yeah.
Was that the case in the 30s?
Yeah, I think so.
Can you think of any specifically?
No.
No?
No.
So Prohibition was... Do you remember any of Prohibition?
Yes, I remember Prohibition. My dad was a non-drinker. Dad didn't drink at all. But back in the 30s, at Christmas time, for instance, the families in the courthouse here would get together and they'd go from house to house to house to house on Christmas Day and visit, you know, and it'd always be eggnog and sometimes just hard liquor there for plenty of people to drink. And Dad, as I said, wouldn't drink. And so finally, one time they convinced him, and people kept saying, well, go on and have a drink. So finally they convinced him to have a drink, and so he did. And he went to the next place, had another drink, went to the next place, had another. Next thing I knew, they were dragging him in, laying him out on the sofa. he was out, but Dad was not a drinker. And I don't know that he ever drank after that.
Wow. There are a lot of really great Main Street traditions now, like the Daffodil Festival and the Halloween Parade. Do you remember anything like that?
I remember the school parades. They did it by class. They formed by class and paraded down there. Yes, we participated in some of those.
Yeah? Did you have a float?
I can't remember that my grade sponsored a float, but a lot of them did. There were a lot of really nice floats that people spent a lot of time on putting those things together. Mm-hmm. In fact, I think I've got movies of those things here somewhere.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. So where would the school parade to?
Oh, and they'd usually start up, well, either at what was then the high school, or maybe even further up at New England Church, somewhere up there, and parade down as far as Edge Hill. Then they disperse from there. But they went in that direction now. Nowadays they go this way.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't know why that is, but I guess I do know why it is. It's because of that big parking lot down there at the foot of Edge Hill. And that's a good place for them to congregate. That wasn't there back in the 30s.
Mm-hmm. Did they have the Daffodil Festival when you were a kid?
My wife was involved with the Daffodil Festival. They gave her that picture there because she was chairman of it one time, but I don't remember it much when I was growing up, because I don't think they had it then. But the flower industry, and it was an industry in those days, a lot of people grew daffodils and sold them at market. I can see boxes were about this long and about that wide and about that deep. And I've done it myself. They'd hire kids and sometimes grown-ups to pick the flowers. They'd pick them and you put 15 of them in a bunch and you put a rubber band around them, and then it would go into the box. I don't know how many bunches would go into a box like that. But then they'd take those boxes and they'd take them all the way to Baltimore for sale. Mm-hmm. But I don't know when the so-called Daffodil Festival started. I don't think that was until after World War II, but I'm not sure.
Okay. Do you remember anything about segregation on Main Street at all?
No, except that it was a fact when I was growing up. I mean, it was just a given. Everybody accepted it, or at least everybody, all the whites accepted it. I don't know how the blacks felt about it. Well, I can imagine how they felt about it, but I think they accepted it because it was an outgrowth of the Civil War, and so they were used to being segregated. And so I think it was a welcome thing to them, but they were, a lot of the blacks, I think a lot of blacks that I knew were uncomfortable with it, because I think they felt like it was something being forced and not something that they had generated themselves. See what I mean?
Do you mean integration or segregation?
Now, I'm talking about when it changed from segregation to integration.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So was this a conversation that you had with black friends that you knew, or?
Well, I had no black friends my age. My mother, always had black maids, and what's the girl's name? Harriet Lemon. Harriet Lemon. You know the name Lemon? That was a very prominent black name. And it was a big family, and very well liked by everybody. Harriet Lemon was one of the maids that my mother had. And usually the families around here, the Core family who lived up there, you know where Monty Haskell lives? Next to, not right next to it, but the second house this side of Body-Tot School. It's a big two-story house that's back off the road. That was owned by W.E. Core, who had a store here. And they had a black maid. I'll bet you she had been there for 40, 45 years. They literally became part of the family back in the 30s. They spent, some of them had live-in quarters at the houses that they served in. And I think the Cores had a place there for theirs. What was that guy? I can't think of what that woman's name is now, but anyhow, as I say, we did not, as children and teenagers, we didn't associate with the blacks.
Did you notice that they, black people came down to Main Street or to court days? Did they patronize businesses on Main Street?
Well, they were there, but I don't know that. I don't know whether they congregated as groups at all. They may have. I just didn't. If they did, I didn't notice it.
Mm-hmm. So they were there on court days.
Yeah, I'm sure they were there, but many of them were, as I say, there was a lot of buying and selling going on, and a lot of them participated in that. Woody Carr's father, as I said, ran a store there, and I don't know, I guess Woody and I were the same age and grew up together. Woody was killed in World War II. He was a gunner on a B-24 that got blown up. And he got killed. He was 17 years old, and he'd already been in the Army a year and a half. So, but anyhow, Woody's father had the store on the corner there at the Court Green, and he sold groceries, he sold clothes. It was a general store and had everything in there. In the back room, he had all sorts of meal and stuff for the farmers around, all that kind of stuff. And one day, so when somebody ordered something out of the ordinary, they would have it sent to Carr's store, and then they'd go there and pick it up. And somebody ordered an upright piano. And this piano came in there, and it was in a box. The box was about that wide, and it was about this tall, and it was straight up for about 3 feet, and then it had a slope up to the top, and the top was about this wide, see? So Woody and I said, man, we're going to use this thing for court day. So we did. We took the slab off of this slanted part up here, and that made a perfect counter. And we sold stuff out of that box. We had stuff in there we would sell, sandwiches and stuff like that for on court day. See? We set it up outside the store.
Wow, that's wonderful. So when court days ended as a social event, what would bring people down to the courthouse green? Maybe in the 60s or 70s even?
Well, they still like to come to court, but this was the business area in the county, and you know, they would come here to go to the bank, and they'd come here to the insurance offices and so forth, lawyers' offices. A lot of those were right here in the village, and so that's what drew them in on when they had business to do.
Yeah. What do you see Main Street looking like in the next 20 or 30 years? What's your vision for it?
Not much different.
No, you want it to stay the same?
It hadn't changed in the last 30 years. I don't think it's going to change much.
Okay.
There isn't much you can do to it. I noticed they're talking about, you know, something about widening Main Street or something like that, and they can't do it because the buildings up there have different setbacks. And so you have a problem getting a setback that fits everything. That's one, you know, being a civil engineer, that's something that I can appreciate.
Yeah.
I did a lot of design work like that, and that would be a problem.
Right. So the fact that Main Street can only really accommodate so much, but the county itself is growing exponentially.
Well, it's interesting because I don't know if you've seen it or not, but the original layout in lots of Gloucester Courthouse didn't actually develop that way. Have you ever seen that plat? Okay. Well, on that plat, you'll notice there's a main street, which is just like it is now, and then there's a side street over there that's parallel Main Street. There's a North Street over here. North Street ain't here. This part of it never developed. The South Street did. That's the one that goes up behind the Presbyterian Church.
Wow.
And that doesn't go all the way through. That just goes part of the way through. But that was on the original plat for Gloucester Courthouse.
So what do you see the village of Gloucester Courthouse, how do you see it fitting into larger Gloucester County as it kind of becomes a bedroom community?
Well, it's going to be in competition with Gloucester Point, I think. Gloucester Point's growing faster than Gloucester Courthouse. And you're going to see increased growth along Route 17. That's always going to happen. Matter of fact, my company wrote a report for the county back in, when was this? About 1955 or something like that. And there were two things that we recommended in that report, and one of them was that the county develop a reservoir, water reservoir, which is we now have. The other thing was that they bypassed Gloucester Courthouse, and that's the bypass over, and exactly the way we had it planned in our report. My brother-in-law, Fred Brown, was working selling automobiles up here in his Buick place up here at the end of Lewis Avenue, across the street over there, and he jumped all over me for that. He said, "Man, what are you trying to do? You're going to ruin our sales." I said, "You're going to make people go on a bypass instead of coming by here?" I said, "Fred, how many people are driving from Maine to Florida and stop in here and buy a Buick from you?" I said, "That ain't going to happen." So we got in trouble for it, but that developed that way. We missed the boat on not doing it on this side of the courthouse. We should have a bypass over here. But of course the deterrent there is Beaver Dam Swamp. You got to cross the Beaver Dam Swamp. You can do that.
Right. What was the other resistance that you met to the bypass? I imagine because of all the Main Street businesses, it was large.
Yeah, well, the traffic count, when we made that report, the traffic count was building. And of course it's a lot worse now than it was then, even with the bypass. But that was really, our feeling was the only way to handle that would be to build a bypass to get that traffic around the village and not through it.
Mm-hmm. If I really don't have anything else to ask for this part, do you have anything? Okay, I'm going to stop it.
Okay.
Unless you have something else you want to share.
Nope, I'm through.
You sure? This is Jessica Taylor with the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program and Library of Congress cooperation for the Veterans History Project at the American Folklife Center. I'm interviewing Hugh Dischinger in Gloucester Courthouse, Virginia on June 17th, 2013 at 4:15 p.m. Mr. Dischinger, can you please state your rank?
My rank? I was a captain when I came out.
Okay. What was your unit and department?
I was in Army Air Corps and became a flyer. Got my wings at Luke Field in Phoenix, Arizona, and flew fighter aircraft. And I flew just about all the types of fighter aircraft that we had, single engine fighters, except for one. I flew twin engine P-38 Lightnings. The rest of them were all single engine.
When did you first become part of that?
I was a student at BMI when World War II began, and I was transferred from the Field Artillery ROTC to the Army Air Corps ROTC, which became the reserves for those two branches.
Mm-hmm. Did you have a specific battalion that you enlisted with?
I was in the 413th Fighter Squadron of the 414th Fighter Group.
Okay.
I was one of them. Let's see, the other one was, I was in the 22nd, I'm not sure I got this right, 22nd Squadron, I think it's, 42nd Squadron of the 15th Fighter Group.
Okay.
At Iwo Jima.
Okay, so you served in the Pacific Theater.
Yeah.
What was your specific campaign? Do you remember?
They sent my group overseas as a P-47 group. That was the 413th Fighter Squadron of the 414th group. And they sent us to Hawaii. And we left Seattle, Washington on New Year's Eve of 1945. And they put us, of course, being flyers, they sent us down by boat. If we'd been in the Navy, they'd have flown us down. But, we went down by ship to Hawaii, went to Honolulu, where we disembarked there. But our base was at Waikiki, not Waikiki, but Waikoloa Air Base, which was up the coast from Honolulu. And so we had been formed as a group, and we expected to go into the combat area as a group. And it didn't happen. We were one of 5, what they called then VLR, Very Long Range Fighter Groups. And those groups had been designed specifically for escort duty, escorting B-29s to Japan. And they were called very long range because up to that point, up to the time that places like Okinawa and Iwo Jima were not accessible for us. And so the closest to Japan was Tinian. And so we were sent to Honolulu, to the Hawaiian Islands, in anticipation of moving into the forward bases when they were taken. It just so happened that my particular group was not among the first to leave there. Some other groups left ahead of us and made those occupations. And so we wanted to stay together because we flew together. We had been flying together for a number of months and so forth. We knew each other very well and how to react in different situations. So we wanted to stay together in one group. And as I say, it didn't happen. They kept moving other groups ahead of us. And so some of us got together and said, we want to get into a combat area. So we had to volunteer to do that. And so I volunteered, and I was sent from the Hawaiian Islands to Iwo Jima.
When was this?
Huh?
Do you remember the date of this?
The date of it?
The date that you went to Iwo Jima from Hawaii.
Well, I was getting ready to say, when I landed at Iwo Jima, it was in, I think, August of 1945. And the war was over in September, the next month. And so I never made a flight to Japan. Never made a flight to Japan. But I was on Iwo Jima when the war ended. And so we stayed around there after the war ended. And the way they rotated people in and out of different units at that time, they had a point system set up. And you gained a certain number of points for how long you'd been into the service, how long you'd been here, how long you'd been there, and so forth. And so the people that had a large number of points, they were the ones that went home first. That meant that they'd had more service than everybody else. And those of us that had fewer points, we stayed more around, and they shifted us around from one base to another, but kept us in the theater. And so that's what happened to me. And after the war ended, they took my outfit and sent us to the Philippines. Well, we couldn't fly directly from Iwo Jima to the Philippines. It was too long a flight. You had to fly from Iwo Jima to Okinawa, and then from Okinawa down to the Philippines. And I was a flight leader at the time, and I was taking off. We were making our movement to go to Okinawa, and I was the next to the last plane in our group to take off, and I had a wingman on my right taking off from Iwo, and I had an engine failure, and so he was right on my wing, and I had to instruct him to get by me before I could take any action about my engine failure. Otherwise, if I try to pull the wheels up, which is what you normally do in a case like that, we'd have wrecked 2 airplanes instead of 1. So I got him to go by me, and once he got clear of me, then I could start taking action, and I started putting the brakes on. And by that time, I got down the end of the runway, and I was going too fast. I went off the end of the runway. Plane caught fire, and I had turned the switches off, and I'd opened the canopy to get out of the cockpit, the whole 9 yards. And I got up to get up out of the cockpit, and you sat on your parachute. And when I got up about like this, my parachute caught on the canopy. I hadn't opened the canopy all the way. So I had to sit back down in the cockpit, turn the switches back on, open the canopy farther, and then get out of the airplane. And the crash crew was sitting there watching me, and they said they never saw anybody get out of an airplane so fast in their life. But I didn't get a scratch, ruined the airplane. It's just shoved that over into the ocean. That was the end of that one. I had 2 accidents while I was on Iwo. That was one of them, and the other one was a mid-air collision in a P-51. A guy flew through a flight of 4 of us and hit 3 of us. And 2 of the 5 planes involved, 2 of the pilots bailed out. And my wingman and I landed safely, but it had knocked my engine out. I didn't have any engine. We were about 6,000 feet, and I was able to land first of all, I had to make a decision, either bail out or try to make a dead stick landing with no engine. And I said, I don't think I want to get out of this airplane. So I made a dead stick landing in the P-51, and they had to replace the engine in that P-51, and I flew it out later back down to Tinian after the war ended. I flew it down there for disposal, but we got down to the Philippines, and depending on who needed people in those days, I was flying either P-51 Mustangs or P-47. So I was shifted back and forth between flying those 2 airplanes. When we went down to the Philippines, we flew P-47s down there, and we were at Clark Field. Stayed there a month or 6 weeks, and they moved us to a fighter strip down south of there. It was out in the desert, about 120 degrees, no trees. It was pretty hot. And then we got our first jets, the P-80s, and they were brand new. We had civilian pilots bring them in to us. They brought them in by ship down to Manila, aboard a ship. They unloaded them there, and then they flew them up to our base. And the civilian pilots gave us 11 hours of ground school and no flight instruction at all. And so that's what we had, 11 hours of ground school, and got in, pushed the goal handle, and took off. And so that's how I learned to fly jets. And I was the 3rd man in the outfit to fly them. The squadron commander checked out, and the operations officer, who was 2nd in command in the squadron, took off. It was 2nd man, and I was number 3. and it was a big deal. Everybody got so excited about it that everybody would come down to the flight line and watch you take off and land, because it was, jets were really something to see. And so I took off on my flight, and I cleared the field, and by the time I leveled off, I was at 12,000 feet. Well, I was used to flying P-51. Normally, I'd be at about 5,000 feet. Went to the jet, and I was up at 12,000 feet. And so the control tower called me on the radio and said, "We're not sure your landing gear is all the way up." So how about flying by the tower and let us check it? Well, I knew what they wanted me to buzz the fields, what they wanted me to do. And so I did. I peeled off from 12,000 feet, and I leveled off, and I went down the runway, about 10 feet off the runway. And when I went by the tower, I was doing 550 miles an hour. Well, it doesn't sound like much now, but in 1946, that was really moving. And that was a real thrill. So I got 5 or 6 flights in the P-8, and then I came home.
That's wonderful. And you know what? It's exactly 15 minutes. Thank you, sir.